So next up, and this one, I don't know even know what to say about this one. This Neil deGrasse Tyson proves the Earth is round. So honestly, it just pissed me off to the point where I'm going to go through every single point of what Neil deGrasse says, and you know, do a rebuttal on it, because I cannot believe that this smug jerk goes on this show, and again is mocking flat earthers and spitting out a whole bunch of ridiculous science. And this is supposed to be, by the way, this Star Talk, excuse me, is like the show that promotes a scientific knowledge type of course by an organization called Brilliant.org. Well, if this is what Brilliant.org is about, it should be called Morons.org, because they didn't get anything right in this. And even this host guy, whoever this guy is talking. And the first thing he says, or not the first thing, but one of the things he says is, oh yeah, well yeah, the sun's or the Earth is flying through space at 17,000 miles an hour. And Neil asked him basically where he pulled that out of, and he was like, well, you know where I pulled it out of, and of course he pulled it out of his butt. Essentially, I wrote a rebuttal afterwards, and essentially, challenged NDT and these guys to a debate. I said, why don't you actually, instead of mocking us, why don't you come on and debate us? And as I read down the comments a little bit further on, I saw Eric Dubay in there talking about, supposedly NDT had agreed to a debate on Joe Rogan's show, and Joe Rogan even had it on the schedule. And nobody ever contacted Eric. He was completely, left in the dark on it. They were just kind of using it for, I don't know, clickbait or whatever. But I'm sure Neil deGrasse Tyson wouldn't want to get near Eric Dubay with a 10-foot pole, because Eric would bury him. Just in asking so many questions and so many the true facts that Eric is so adept at. And I think even any good flat earther will have these same facts. But I personally would love to see a debate like that take place, or even if they came on GLOBEBUSTERS and faced the 3 or 4 of us. I don't think they'd stand a chance. And like I said, open challenge, Neil deGrasse Tyson, you and your pseudoscience cronies, if you really want to show us how stupid we are, you are more than welcome to come on our show and talk to us about it. But like that's ever going to happen, right, guys?
Well, I'm game.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So let's go through and let's just hit these point by point, and then I'm going to just show some obvious rebuttals. One thing that Neil deGrasse Tyson did admit in here, and this floored me. But guys, Globies, all you people out there that use the Eratosthenes argument of the sticks and shadows and wells or whatever, and that's another thing that's crazy, is they can't even agree on how the actual Eratosthenes experiment was done, whether it was done with a pillar and a well or 2 sticks or whatever. There's several different versions of it, and that just tells me that it's a fabricated story. But anyway, we'll cover that in a minute. But so I guess let's just go ahead and start this, and we'll just hit it point by point and go back. This is fair use, Star Talk, so don't hit us with a copyright strike. We'll just appeal it and win. This is fair use because we are going to comment on it, we are going to critique it, and everything else that we can do with it. So here we go.
So tell me, Neil, is the Earth flat?
We have video from space of the rotating spherical Earth.
Wrong. We don't have video from space of the rotating spherical Earth. I'm sure everybody knows that. The best thing that they've ever been able to do is the Himawari, which is basically every several minutes they update it. And of course, anybody that wants to claim the ISS is real, well, you just go ahead and keep believing that. So let's keep going.
The Earth is round.
Thank you for joining us on this episode.
What's odd is there are people who think Earth is flat,
right?
But recognize that the moon is round. Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and the sun are all spheres, but Earth is...
Okay, next thing. No, we don't recognize that all of the other planets are spheres. Well, first he said round, and I will agree with round. And you have to admit it's pretty funny, how they seem to obfuscate the word round with spherical. Because if somebody says the Earth is round, I'm going to agree with them and say, yep, I agree, it is round. But what it isn't is spherical. Right. And we certainly do not agree that all the other planets are round. I mean, a lot of people again can say, well, we can look through a telescope and we can see Jupiter and Mars and Saturn, and they're definitely round. It's like, no. Again, and we've covered this before, you're not seeing you are seeing something that's round, but you're not seeing anything that's spherical. Again, because it takes binocular or stereoscopic vision to perceive something in 3D. So really, all you're doing is you're seeing a circle, and your brain is telling you, because of your preconceived programming or your beliefs, that it is spherical. It is not. You're seeing a round thing, a round object in the sky, light in the sky, and that's about as far as it goes. So no, flat earthers absolutely do not agree with that statement, Neil. You're wrong, and your whole model of the flat Earth, being this disk floating through space, is a terrible misrepresentation of what the flat Earth model actually is. Even the craziest of flat Earth models don't really have it as that. So yeah.
Again, it's just straw man arguments, right? That they love to put up there and then knock down.
Yeah, it's totally ridiculous because as flat earthers, we are held to this extremely high standard, and we must know the heliocentric model better than the average globie, right? I mean, that's a given. For most flat earthers know more about the heliocentric model than your average globie. But on the other hand, Neil deGrasse can take this just absurd concoction where he basically takes the heliocentric model and inserts a flat disk Earth, which is just absolutely ridiculous. And I'm sure he's going to proceed to debunk this total red herring, total straw man. But why aren't they held to the same standard? How are they able to just invent their own versions of flat Earth and then debunk that? We can't do that. We have to debunk the actual science, in quotes, behind the spinning ball Earth. And of course, we're doing an excellent job with that collectively. But yeah, it's just really ridiculous, the double standard.
Well, you're dealing with people too that have a totally different level of what's considered fact. Like recently I was talking to Soundly, and how can you argue with somebody who says things are facts when they just aren't? Soundly said, I was talking about Jupiter and whether it was a planet or not, and he said, well, there are observational facts like evidenced by the Shoemaker-Levy comet. He said the Shoemaker-Levy comet came and hit Jupiter, and then the pieces flew off and entered Jupiter orbit, and that was an observational fact. And I said, where do you get that from? Show me the videos of that. If you look online for the videos of this so-called Shoemaker-Levy hitting Jupiter, it is such a laughable joke that anybody would ever consider that an observational fact. It's clearly computer animations. There's nothing. It's nothing even close to anything that anybody would consider real. But these guys all consider that to be observational facts. So they get to just throw CGI things in and call them observational fact, and everybody listening to them is going to agree. Oh yeah, that's a fact that this comet hit Jupiter, and then we got to see pieces of it fly into orbit. It's just, and it's not an observational fact. It's a fabrication. That's what you call it.
From what I gather, okay, you have these either allegedly orbiting telescopes, right, that scientists can rent time on, or they can use time on it to do their, research, in air quotes, looking at the stars, which is, pretty far from research. But, they rent time on these, and if it's supposedly from a satellite, then it must be completely CG. Now, if it's something like the Lucifer telescope that's owned by either the Vatican or the Jesuits or whatever, you can scientists can rent time on that remotely as well. So that may also be, have the ability to incorporate CG. But yeah, it is pretty astonishing what scientists apparently glean from looking at the stars through telescopes that are allegedly on orbital
spacecraft
trajectories.
because anything like that is going to come through a computer system first. It's going to come through, and then it's going to be handed out after the fact. So none of that is observational. That's why I say, even if you believe in the moon landings, the last time somebody actually saw the ball Earth, a human being with their own eyes, would have been 1972. And if you don't believe in the moon landings, congratulations. But if you don't, then you realize that nobody in the history of the world has ever seen the ball Earth, ever. And so how can you just say, oh, well, these satellites show it? Well, yeah, the satellites show it after whatever they've taken a picture of has gone through processing. And so you're trusting the processor to make sure that it's not distorted the image at all, that it hasn't easily taken whatever image has come in and wrapped it on a ball. And we've seen those things. We've seen the models that they have where they just take a cloud layer and wrap it on a ball. So to me, it's just crazy that these things are just assumed facts. And if you're a believer in science, then you have to agree that those things are already assumed. That's why I call it a religion, because you have to believe in certain aspects in order to be, a science backer. You have to believe in that religion.
Yep. Yeah, and the other thing is, Soundly, of course, believes the New Orleans footage is irrefutable proof of curvature, right?
Right. I told him it's distorted, and he said it's not distorted. It's not distorted? Oh, gosh.
I know, right? So, anyway, so Iru has joined us. Yay, Iru, you made it.
Hello, guys. Sorry for the delay. I think it was like in a regular time. So
yeah, no, we knew what happened. We knew what happened, Iru, and I predicted. I called. I go, because the United States is so weird, and we did our daylight savings time a little bit different. I'll bet you that Iru is not going to be aware of it. And don't feel bad, Iru, because half the people in the United States didn't know it either.
Okay.
And just commenting one more time on this still frame, a good place to pause it, but it's really amazing how effective this sort of, and what this is exactly is propaganda and brainwashing. They're using the prestige and the name of Neil deGrasse Tyson as if for some reason he's like an authority on science, which is laughable. But so people will see this documentary, and suddenly they're going to be an expert on flat Earth and how to debunk it. And this sort of thing is what gets the massive publicity. They have this sort of mind control down to a science where if they put out enough of this sort of propaganda, you'll have a good, 50% of the world at large thinking how preposterous flat Earth is, because this is the image that they're going to draw up in their mind. And it all traces right back all the way to kindergarten, when they, showed you how stupid people were 600 years ago, when they thought that if you sailed too far, you'd fall off the Earth into space. And, of course, as you guys already mentioned, this doesn't match any sort of flat Earth model. All this is the heliocentric model with a disk Earth placed in the middle of it. So you really don't even have explanation for the seasons or sunrise or sunset. I mean, it's just absurd for him to present this as such. But again, this is the only way that they can combat flat Earth truth, is by just absolute deception and drowning out our voices by, they have the big microphone, the big platform. I think now there used to be 5, now there's 4 major media companies, including like Disney and Time Warner or whatever. I think there's 4 now, it used to be 5. And once you've got a lockdown on everything that people see and hear, that's when the truth is in big trouble. But we'll still keep going at it. But this is just absurd.
Yep, absolutely. So, Iru, we're glad you made it, buddy. I was telling everybody earlier that a little bit about the AMSAT thing, and that you had some big news for us. And we'll get to that here shortly. But I just wanted to say hello, and how's everything down in Argentina?
Great, and hello for everyone, John, Sharon. It's nice to be here again, because the last shows I missed it. I was in the Flat Earth meeting here in Argentina the last week, and the topic here is growing up very quickly. I always at the end of the show I show some news, some articles, but it's really growing up. In fact, the last show you you show to the people the convex Earth, which is from Brazil. So there are really rush times for the flat Earth, and of course all around the plane, because all this kind of news and this kind of debunks from the mass media, it's clearly a signal of the concern that they have about this.
Yeah. Flat Earth meeting. Yeah, how many girls in bikinis were at that last Flat Earth meeting, buddy?
Zero. No, zero, man.
Really? At a pool party? Holy cow.
Yeah, because yes. We don't have so much. I put the name pool party because was a pool, a swimming pool in the house, but it didn't. It wasn't really a pool party like you have in the United States.
Oh.
It's just a regular meeting with a swimming pool in the house. Just that.
Okay. All right. I was all envious, thinking, yeah, that dog is sitting there getting an eyeful, and we're sitting here having to deal with winter weather. All right. Okay, cool. So yeah, we will get to your news here shortly. We're going through right now, just to fill you in. We're going through this release that Neil deGrasse Tyson put out with on the Star Talk channel here in conjunction with Brilliant.org, and how much nonsense it is. So we're just kind of going through it point by point, and then afterwards we'll share your great news and what's going on with you. So let's get back to this. I'm going to continue playing it, and let's see what else, what other BS Neil has.
It's flat. That's not, something doesn't square.
Something doesn't jive, right?
Okay. Plus, in my latest book, ooh, did I just plug my book?
Wait, your latest book is called Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. What? We just happen to have a copy right here.
No, it just happens to me. I swear we didn't plant the book. I have an entire chapter titled On Being Round. Oh. And it's an exploration of how all the laws of physics and the accounting of energy as processes unfold in the universe, how that conspire to make things round.
So it favors the sphere.
Favors a sphere, yes.
Sure it does.
And if something is not a sphere, it's a little bit flattened, you can ask what flattened it, and you find out, oh, it's rotating real fast.
Right.
So then it gets a little flattened because of that.
Right.
And so almost everything in the universe is either spheres or slight distortions of a sphere for some other thing that's happening to it. I mean, we can just see how the universe favors spheres.
So it's nature.
Right.
Basically.
All right, so let's talk about that for a second. What Neil just said about things that are just slightly distorted, and how that works and why it's slightly distorted. So the first thing that I want to do is bring up. Oh wow, I seem to have missed that. Let me bring up here something. Wow, I thought I had this queued. I'm really sorry, guys. So I will pull this up. And guys, feel free to comment really quick while I look this up. But this comes from a show that we did a while ago about, the oblateness of the world. Here it is. Okay. All right. And at that time, I highlighted a video that Rendra AZ and Lydia Thyatira had actually done. And they kind of looked at that, and they took what the scientists were saying, and they said, okay, the scientists are saying that, as a result of this spinning of the Earth, the centrifugal force, basically it gives the world its oblateness, its oblate spheroid shape, which means that obviously that 1,037.5 mile an hour rotation speed is putting some serious stresses on. Well, that's all fine and dandy, except there doesn't seem to be any evidence of it. Not only is there no evidence of any oblateness, shown in NASA's pictures, and of course the rebuttal to that will be, oh, well, it's only a couple miles, which comes down to 0.000 whatever percent. Okay, fine and dandy, but science also says that there should be quite a buildup of water at the equator, which there is not. And so I'm going to play this, and what we're seeing here is we're seeing a demonstration where a lady is taking one of those little things where she spins it, and the centrifugal force causes this thing to actually collapse and go oblate. And she's saying that this is exactly what is happening to the Earth and why we're getting our oblateness in it. So, and then after that, so Lydia Thyatira and Render AZ break that down as to what science says it should be. And let's just take a listen, because they say it better than I do. Well, first up is going to be this lady talking about the spin. So here we go.
Occurred becomes stable. And this is at the point when the rotational force or the centrifugal force has balanced.
So what they're demonstrating here is basically how the equator bulges out allegedly because of the spin of the Earth. Now, again, we've said many times, if the Earth is spinning, you know, and people aren't flying off, then why is it causing this bulge of the Earth supposedly? Oops. So let's go back and let's now listen to what Lydia says about this.
As a result of the Earth's rotation, there is a difference in the Earth's radius from pole to pole versus the equator, and this difference is as great as 40 kilometers. If we divide the left and right sides of the globe so each side has a 20-kilometer advantage, the excess 20 kilometers of mass is water, according to physicists. Centrifugal action and the properties of water should result in a large amount of water on the equator. Is that true? 20 kilometers equals 65,616.8 feet. That's a lot of water pulled at the equator. So let's see how deep the ocean is at the equator. The Indonesian Sea is no more than 6.2 kilometers or 20,341 feet in depth. India achieves a maximum sea depth of 8.047 kilometers or 26,400 feet, and the Atlantic Ocean reaches only 8.605 kilometers or 28,231 feet. The Pacific Ocean only reaches a depth of 10.911 kilometers or 35,797 feet. There's actually only one region in the Pacific Ocean which reaches a depth of more than 20 kilometers, and that's on the Mariana Trench. Even this was not caused by the Earth spinning at the ludicrous speeds reported. Rather, this is due to tectonic activity in the seabed. Based on the aforementioned depths of the sea, it seems apparent that the statements made by physicists that the ocean bulges 20 kilometers at the equator due to the Earth spins needs re-examination.
20 kilometers. That's a whole lot of water, guys. And yet that is what mainstream science is telling us should be happening. And by their own measurements, they have contradicted themselves once again. So Niel Degrass's Tysons statement, or his assertion, then, that the oblateness is coming from that spinning appears to not be true. And in fact, we can see no evidence whatsoever of any oblateness, either from any NASA photograph, either from any water buildup. You know, people will say that there's a weight difference, you know, from the equator to the North Pole, but I personally have never seen any demonstration of that, so I tend to doubt that highly. And even if it is true, I would say that it is more likely that it has more to do with a possible change in potential, static electric potential, from one latitude to the next. But you know, that's just a guess on my part, but if that was true, I would say that's kind of the way it is. Go ahead, Earl.
No, I just want to point out that one of the famous quote from the great Tyson, it's the universe is perfectly flat. I don't know if you have ever listened that, but for example, there is a video in Spanish from a university called why the solar system is flat. And in fact, in the universe, you have, in the heliocentric universe, a Big Bang universe, you have a few examples of flatness. For example, the galaxy, for example, all the orbits are flat, perfectly flat. And, you know, then you have, for example, Brian Cox trying to show how the gravity, you know, molds the planets based on, you know, picking up some dirt with water and trying to make some kind of clay ball. And if you start to think, for example, the scientists, they didn't know why the galaxy don't rip apart, and then they come with this kind of black energy, or all the things that, because they trying to find some kind of substance to glue the galaxy, because they don't the galaxies never be broke apart. But when you see the sky, you see a lot of flatness things. In fact, they telling us that kind of behavior in the universe. So why, if the orbits are flat, if the galaxy are flat, why the planets is gonna be a sphere?
Yeah,
that is my point of view. I have the video here. It's in Spanish. I'm not going to share because I think it's not have any sense. But if you want to put in, like a background video, or then sharing in the comments section.
Okay, absolutely, we can do that. So yeah, and I agree with you too. Go ahead, John.
Oh, I was just going to say, in terms of the whole centrifugal force argument, that brings up some pretty interesting points, because, yeah, of course, they claim that the spinning globe Earth is oblate because of that centrifugal force towards the equator. But then, as you said, Bob, one of the biggest arguments we always get is this argument that, on a global scale, the angular acceleration isn't all that much. It's like 0.000 whatever, like you said. But that's true hypothetically. However, on a human scale, on this giant spinning globe Earth, in theory, these accelerations are massive. I mean, you're talking about, 1,000 miles an hour east, standing at the equator, which they call that a fixed frame of reference, which, that's fine if you're moving in a perfectly straight line path. But when you add in the hypothetical fact that you're supposedly going along a curve, a parabolic curve, then you would necessarily experience constant acceleration in the form of angular acceleration, and that's manifest as centrifugal force. And so for them to call that a fixed frame of reference is ridiculous. And one final point that needs to be made on this is the difference between the centrifugal force hypothetically at the equator versus the centrifugal force at the pole, because the disparity would be practically infinite comparing the two locations, and yet gravity doesn't affect the two locations any differently or much differently at all, when it should affect, the poles with a much heavier accelerative force, if you will, simply because there is not that alleged massive centrifugal force being generated by zipping along that inverse square curve at 1,000 miles an hour at the equator, hypothetically standing perpendicular to the axis of rotation, while compare that to the North Pole. You're supposedly standing on top of the axis, discernibly not spinning at all, just spinning as fast as the hour hand on a clock, or half that fast. And it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever for globists to say that the weight of, say, a ton of coffee shouldn't be like way more at the North Pole compared to the equator. But the problem is, as usual, they want to have their cake and eat it too, and say that centrifugal force does exist, and that's where we get this alleged, 20-kilometer swelling of the equatorial oceans, right?
Yeah, absolutely true. So, okay, so let's move on. I think we pretty much debunked that because it's nonsense. And once again, Neil, you're wrong again. So let's move on.
The universe.
In all fairness to the people who want a flat Earth.
Yes, let's be fair to those people.
Yeah, we want.
In Columbus's day, there was surely a flat Earth contingent. Okay?
Yes.
Columbus predates the era of experimental checking of any idea you might have.
Not a lot of peer-reviewed studies back in the day.
Back in the day.
Back in the day. Kind of just like,
you just say whatever you felt.
You know what? I believe that elephant poop will cure cancer.
There you go.
That's right. Wrote a paper about it. Like to read it? Here it is. And
And you know the irony of that is, of course, that is exactly how modern-day scientism seems to carry things out. So it's pretty laughable. Continue on.
Good, right?
Right. So it wasn't until Francis Bacon, Galileo, in the 1600s, where the idea that if you're going to say something and you think what you're saying is true, then no matter how obvious you think it is that it's true, you should still test it.
Gotcha.
There could be some.
Wow, that's a turnaround from what he said before. Remember that, Jaron? When he said that, oh, well, you know, finally there comes a point where somebody says the earth is flat, you just need to kind of just dismiss that because we know better, right? And now he's saying totally the opposite.
Which is good.
Yeah, which is good. So, yeah, it's crazy. All right, let's keep moving on because... Oh, go ahead, John.
Real quick, I was just going to say, don't you love how Neil deGrasse will absolutely not debate anyone, but he'll sit there with people that are just going to agree with everything he says and scoff at flat earthers and make fun of how silly they are. But no, he will not enter a debate on the subject. So I just think that's an interesting point.
Yeah, indeed. All right, so moving forward.
Something fooling you in one way or another. So if you want to say Earth is flat, then, for example, lunar eclipses. What's a lunar eclipse? If your face is the brilliant sun.
Thank you.
And this is Earth, and the moon is over here. The sun is always casting Earth's shadow into space. It's always there no matter what.
Right.
Obviously, okay? It's just a shadow.
It's a shadow.
The moon
It's just
occasionally...
a shadow shining on blackness.
Yeah, a shadow in darkness.
A shadow in darkness.
So the moon occasionally passes through that shadow. And if you see the shape of Earth's shadow on the moon, it is always round. Always round. If Earth were flat, sometimes you get like a flat shadow.
Right.
We've never seen a flat shadow.
Right.
In fact, it is a segment of a arc of a circle, no matter the orientation of the moon and the sun. And the only thing that makes a perfectly circular shadow
would be something that's perfectly circular.
Perfectly spherical.
Spherical. Right.
Yes. So.
Okay, now you know why I asked you for that clip last night.
Yes. But this guy use all the time the same argument, you know. It's
ridiculous.
Yes.
Okay.
You know,
yes.
And I just can't believe that they're going back to totally taking the heliocentric model, inserting a flat disk Earth into that, and saying, "Oh, look how silly this is." But it just shows how either ignorant they are about this whole thing, or they're willfully deceiving people about it.
Yeah, absolutely true. So, Neil's last statement. That it had to be an absolutely perfect sphere in order to cast that shadow on the moon for the eclipse. And as Iru demonstrated this so beautifully at the FEIC 2017 conference at Tip to Iru, and also his buddy that sent this to him, what we're looking at here is a perfectly straight surface eclipsing an orange. Oh, look at that. Well, so much for that assertion, Neil. Wrong again, buddy. There you have it. There you've got that nice little arc, and what is it being produced by? Certainly not any sphere or even anything round for that matter. It's being produced by a square piece or a rectangular piece of cardboard. So
in fact, these guys, anytime they talk about eclipses, they never mention the selenium issue in the globe model. For example, that is the first thing. And the other is we have records about the regular astronomers in the early 18th centuries and 17th centuries that they have write it down, this non-luminous body cover the moon and the sun, and somebody calls Rahu, Ketu, whatever. But they in the Royal Academy of Astronomy, they have those records. So this guy, they even take another possibilities to be other kind of bodies orbiting these luminaries. It's like, okay, this is what it is, and we forgot all the history of our own academy.
Yeah. And the funny thing about the Selenian area is, of course, obviously, it just completely puts out the window the whole idea of bodies passing in between each other, because you can clearly see the sun and the moon in the sky at the same time during this type of eclipse. So what does the mainstream do? Well, I think they borrow a page out of Mick West's book of Schillery, and say, oh, well, there's this ultimate refraction then that goes around and causes this.
Yeah, the magic refraction. But
if they even do that, sometimes they'll just tell you that you're making it up and there is no such thing as a selenelion.
Yeah, in fact, the shadows come from top to bottom. Yeah. That is another issue.
Yes, that is a whole other issue. They come in completely the wrong direction. Many people have noted that, and I've never really seen a glober address that. Other than they say, well, at different parts of the world, supposedly you're going to get different angles of eclipse, but that's nonsense, especially when you look at the geometry of it. So I'm not buying that, and I'm certainly not buying an extreme refraction case either. There's several Royal Institutes of Astronomy have documented these Selenian accounts, and it's something that's real, and it destroys the heliocentric model. So let's continue on with even more Neil deGrasse Tyson nonsense.
So the only thing that
yes,
can you and I hate to back up, but just like 10 seconds to their diagram of the eclipse should be like, yeah, there it is right there. Yeah, right. Yeah. What I think's funny is, this is how you would expect shadows to behave, and this is how they have it diagrammed. But according to the heliocentric model, that shadow, instead of being a divergent conical shape away from the Earth,
yes,
we're expected to believe that it's a convergent conical shape that goes off into a pinpoint, which is just so ridiculous. But anyway, I thought that was funny, because if flat earthers make a diagram like this, the globe heads will be like, "Oh, that's not how shadows behave in space." But indeed, that is how shadows behave in all other physical experiments, except non-testable space, right? So anyway,
in fact, that shadow must be parallel, right? Supposedly,
at least parallel, or possibly divergent, but certainly not convergent off into a stylus point at the end. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
And the last thing is, when you see a real lunar eclipse, they made all this history about the light beams be rejected, and only the red ones, because when you see a lunar eclipse, you're gonna see that the shadow cover all the moon, and suddenly the moon turns red. And
right,
what happened?
Yeah, how does that happen? I know, and the excuses they come up with to explain it are comical, to say the least. But all right, so let's move on forward here.
All right.
Would be something that's perfectly circular.
Perfectly spherical.
Spherical.
Yes. Right. So the only thing that makes a perfect circle shadow every single time is a perfect sphere.
Right.
Debunked.
Okay? No matter what angle you shine. Whereas a disc, it would only make a perfect circle if you lined it that way.
Right.
And then
you have to look at the face of the disc in order to get the circle.
The circle.
If any other angle,
you get
something of another
shape. The Greeks knew this.
Right.
All the lunar eclipses, they said, oh my gosh, we must be in a round Earth. This is thousands of years, 2,000 years before Columbus. Exactly. Right. So now if the Earth is round, how big is Earth? Mm-hmm. You might want to check for that. There was a famous experiment conducted by Eratosthenes. Eratosthenes. And the two cities in the old world, and one of them, they knew that at 12 noon on a particular day of the year, that the sun was directly overhead and you could see the bottom of a well.
Oh, okay.
You don't run around looking at the bottoms of wells.
No.
Because the light doesn't take, it's just, no.
Doesn't get down there.
Doesn't get down there.
How can we use this observation to see if Earth's...
Okay, so obviously he's talking about the Eratosthenes experiment in Alexandria and Syene. But you guys, now this is extraordinary. Like I said, Neil is about to make an absolutely extraordinary admission here. Essentially saying, well, not essentially saying, he says it straight up, that this particular experiment will work not only if the Earth was a sphere, and the sun is large and a far distance away, but also if the sun is close and local, right? And then he goes and he sticks his foot in his mouth by then making the assertion, but by saying, well, if Eratosthenes would have added a third well, then that would have proven the would have proven the spherical Earth, which of course is nonsense. But let's hear Niel make this historic admission. Here we go.
The surface is curved. We needed another well. Turns out we can't see the bottom of both wells at the same time. What might explain this? Well, there are two possible explanations. First, we could have a flat Earth with the sun that's small and close by, so that the light hits the second well at an angle. Or second, we could have a curved Earth with a sun that's big and far away, so that all the light comes in parallel, but only one well at a time is lit all the way to the bottom. Turns out with just two wells, there's enough wiggle room for both explanations to fit our observations. Eratosthenes only had two wells. But what if he...
Okay, guys, there it was. So next time a Glober hits you with that BS argument about Eratosthenes and how it was proven, 2,000 years ago, you can say, sorry, Charlie. And not only that, it's most likely a myth. And I'm going to go into even further detail on that in a second. But let's hear what else he says. Oh, go ahead, Drew.
No, keep going.
Okay. All right, here we go.
He had added a third. With a third well, it doesn't matter where the sun is. No flat Earth model can explain the angles of all three shadows. But the spherical model explains it all three angles, with ease.
And to do this experiment, you got to measure the angles. Greeks had the angles.
Yeah.
Okay, in fact, geometry translates to Earth measurement. So one last thing, which should be obvious.
Okay.
If you pay attention and think about it. If you send a ship straight to the horizon,
right?
Okay, before I get to that, let's go ahead and cover a little bit more of this. That last statement he said is absolute BS, and in fact, gosh, I can't remember who the other YouTuber is. It was Dr. Zach. Basically, already explained that and did a video on it, completely debunking that entire idea. But what I want you guys to remember is here, NDT is talking about the wells, right, that Eratosthenes used. Well, that's all fine and dandy. Now, here's another piece of information from Scientific Gems here, and they're talking about Eratosthenes' experiment, except they say that here in Alexandria, they used a column, right? Eratosthenes used a column, and that it was at Syene that they used the well. All right, great. Well, that seems to be a conflict, but it gets better. It gets better. So here we have, this is from the My Path to Flat Earth, Karen B, hat tip to Karen B. And here we're going to have Carl Sagan telling us even another variation of this story. So let's listen to this for a second. And by the way, this is being offered to the world as proof of Earth's sphericity before NDT just made his historic admission that it's BS and it will work with either model. Here we go.
Decided that the Earth was a ball.
Map of ancient Egypt. I've inserted two sticks or obelisks, one up here in Alexandria and one down here in Syene. Now, if at a certain moment each stick casts no shadow at all, that's perfectly easy to understand, provided the Earth is flat. If the shadow at Syene is at a certain length, and the shadow at Alexandria is the same length, that also makes sense on a flat Earth. But how could it be, Eratosthenes asked, that at the same instant there was no shadow at Syene and a very substantial shadow at Alexandria? The only answer was that the surface of the Earth is curved.
Okay, well, obviously that's not the only answer, and it's funny because back in that particular era, people still thought the world was flat and that the sun and moon were close and local. So how he would say...
And stationary.
And stationary. So how he would make the leap, and it's a big leap, of saying that Eratosthenes could only come to the one conclusion would mean that Eratosthenes, for some reason, knew beforehand, before he even did this experiment, that the Earth supposedly was a sphere, which of course kind of annihilates the entire idea of this whole experiment if he's going into this with a notion that is wildly different, that wouldn't even come around for another 1,500 years, after this supposed idea. And again, we have no way of actually verifying this, and I'm sure that this clearly is a fabricated story because, hell, what we've just seen here from three allegedly reputable sources, Carl Sagan, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and this particular article. Which is it? Did he use two wells? Did he use two sticks? Did he two obelisks? Or did he use a tower and a well? Any comments on that?
Well, and what you need to look at is why don't we know exactly what he used or where he was? Is because the original work is lost. So again, these are not facts. These are not observational facts. They're stories being told years after where we don't have the original work. So anything that's being said about it is simply added at some point in history.
Yes.
Yeah, in fact, for me at least, one of the most ridiculous, thing about the history of Eratosthenes, it's how he get the measurements from Alexandria to Cyrene. I don't know which is how to pronounce the name, but did you know how they get those measurements, 800 kilometers, or I don't know how many stadium, because at that time the kilometer didn't exist, of course. But officially, I mean, if you look it on the web, in the history or book of histories, how they going to teach the people that Eratosthenes found that distance.
Yeah, well, obviously, the problem here is you're not up to speed on Stone Age telegraph and telephone, where Eratosthenes used two tin cups and a several hundred-mile piece of string.
From what I gather, he did it 1 year, and then the next year did it from the other location. That's one version, and I've heard another version where he had a friend that was at the other location on the same day at the same time. But either way, I guess that's good enough. But one thing that's really important to point out is that for the ancient Eratosthenes, assuming that he did this experiment, and there are some inconsistencies in the story, assuming that he did this, this was something that was postulated. It certainly wasn't widely believed at that time. If it was postulated by the ancient Greeks, it may have been debated in their circles, but honestly, it wasn't until after the late 1400s, early 1500s that the first globes were made, once Columbus sailed the oceans blue. And of course, Columbus himself, disagreed with Eratosthenes' value if, assuming that the Earth was a sphere. But it was right after that when they started making globes because, of course, it was drilled into people's brains that, we can circumnavigate the world. We don't fall off the edge, therefore we live on a globe. But, of course, that was a huge deception because we all know that there are many different alternative ways that can work upon a plane. So, circumnavigation, that is.
Yep.
And I just for share, I share my screen. I don't know if you are seeing.
Yeah, I see. Hang on a second here, and I will present it.
Okay. Yeah.
Skype. Okay.
Just for share what about here in the Spanish language about Eratosthenes. The official history is that he take a camel and he count the steps of the camel, from Alexandria to Cyrene, and that is one of the history. And the other history is here marked on blue. Is that he paid to an army because he knew that army make regular steps. So he count the steps of the army from Cyrene to Alexandria.
That's unbelievable.
Yes, that is official history in books here about how Eratosthenes, measured that distance. And, for example, in some videos online in the Spanish language, they tell that nobody knows how Eratosthenes get the angle of 7.2 degrees? Nobody knows that. And there is 2 theories. All the time they have theories and theories. In fact, in this Spanish video, the voice says, and how Eratosthenes get that angle? Nobody knows, but we know that that guy was a genius. That is the assumption, you know. And then if you just see a little, you know, here is when say 2 theories exist, and that is official. They don't have a clue. And just a little, you know, occultist thing, is that when you divide the word, in fact in Spanish, Eratosthenes, you have like the era of thought, and this is thought. And in the Egyptian methodology, thought was the god, you know, in charge of measurements.
God, that's unbelievable. You've got a million of these, don't you? Every time you present one of these, it blows me away.
I don't have a million. Yeah, we can, you know, we can make a complete show based on these, you know, things. But here, I always say that, you know, point the same thing. But look at the roundness of the head of the supposedly Greek Eratosthenes, and look how, you know, the spherical thing of the head of this Egyptian guy. And we know that the Greeks take all the knowledge from the Egyptians guys. So Eratosthenes is like said the era of thought. For me, that is my opinion. Just that.
And you could just look into the dates that you know, trigonometry even was supposedly discovered, which was you know, around 300 AD. And then you can look back at the people, like, how do we know about Aristophanes at all? And like the very first book that was written was by somebody named Cleomedes. And there's problems with that too, because the very first book that even mentions Aristophanes, one historian placed it at the 100 AD. I'm sorry, 100 BC. And then other guys have come along after and said, no, it was more like 370 or 470 AD. But none of them even have any proof when the person who supposedly wrote this book wrote the book about Eratosthenes. So we don't even know when this person lived. It's just a book that was written about Eratosthenes and his experiment that, again, was written in 1600 or 1700 like everything else. And that's what people really need to understand, is none of this stuff is history. Not history like you would expect history to be. It's always misdated. It's people that are placed randomly. I've talked about it before, that hero, the elder, whatever his name was, who was also somebody from Alexandria, who also talked about geometry and things like that, who came 100. No, this was Huron.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, they're all these guys. But he never even mentioned Aristophanes in any of his books when he lived in the same city and lived just 100 years after him. So why would it take 400 years for someone to come along and then write about this experiment if somebody 100 years after, also in the same study, never mentioned it? And like I think Ira said, that they're not even sure how he could have possibly come up with the angle, that they didn't have tools to measure that.
Yeah, somebody said about the anemone, another something called scarp. I don't know if it's the same name in English, but they don't know nothing. They just made up the histories. That's for sure.
Yeah. Now, somebody said in the level terrestrial plane science said that 7.2 is a reference to squaring the circle, and I'm not exactly sure where that goes, but that was just put out there.
Yeah, the Masonic guys, they have the symbol of the square and the compass, and supposedly it's because when with a square you measure the land, and with the compass you measure the sky, because all our perception of the sky is spherical, semi-spherical. If you look at it like that, behavior of the we see the sky as because when you're talking about this guy from Brazil, talking about the convex Earth, you can clearly see that the model is flat, but the convex is because we can say we live inside of some sort of semi-spherical thing, because the land is totally flat, but the sky have this spherical, semi-spherical shape. So the Freemasons use that analogy in the symbol of the square and the compass, and it's something like squaring the circle or circling the square, something like that. Sorry for my poor explanation, but
no worries.
That is my way to understand it.
Beautiful. Okay. All right. So getting back to where we were, and I want to take just a couple second excursion because I want to play this one other section of Karen B's video that I have always found extraordinary, and I think that any newbie needs to really think about this, because this, what she's about to say here, absolutely crushes the heliocentric model in every way, shape, and form, and the excuses or the explanations I've heard for this just don't cut it. So I'm just going to play this as like 45 seconds, and then we'll get back to Niel. But I really think this is so extraordinary. Karen did a great job on it. So let's listen to what she says here.
Over our head. Here is the sun in space. Here is the Earth. The Earth orbits the sun while spinning on its axis. At night, when we are not facing the sun, we see the stars in the dark part of space. Why don't we see completely different constellations 3 months later when we are a quarter of the way through our orbit? Or how about 3 months after that when we are on the opposite side of the sun? Every 3 months the constellations should be completely different, but they aren't.
Yep, I couldn't agree with that more. And John, I know we've talked about this before, and I've heard some of the excuses about with reference to the North Pole and all this stuff, but it just simply doesn't add up, because we should have completely distinctly different skies. And a lot of people will say, well, the skies do change from summer to winter, but no, it's like they're not changing to that degree where we're getting completely different stars at each season of the year. So just something I wanted to point out. Do you guys have any thoughts on this before we go back to Niel?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, that's a really, really big point that really just decimates the heliocentric theory, because, if we can see even one constellation that's, say, 90 degrees overhead from anywhere on Earth during the winter, 6 months later, you're facing towards the opposite side of the universe in theory. And this just doesn't add up. You would never see any of the same constellations from season to season, yet from somewhere on Earth you can see many of the same constellations from season to season where you technically shouldn't be able to. And that's a slam dunk win for flat Earth. And so is the visibility of the full moon during the day or the crescent moon at night. I mean, every last bit of evidence that we look at and really skeptically, objectively scrutinize, it always never fails to land on the side of flat Earth, and the globe Earth just becomes more and more absurd with every bit of evidence that we look at.
Yep.
Yeah. They have, of course. Sorry. Go ahead, Jenna.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that you can look at just the whole myth of Columbus and the entire story, and if Aristophanes in 300 BC figured out the circumference of the globe being 25,000 miles, then the whole story of Columbus doesn't make any sense. There's no way that in his little 3-month travel that he could have thought he ever hit India. It's because they thought they lived on a much smaller ball. That's what, if you kind of read into the lines, that's kind of the truth of the Columbus story. That's why he thought he hit India. Not because if they would have known it was 25,000 miles around, then he would have why did it take them, be 1,700 years? 1,700 years until someone got in a boat and just said, let's cruise that way since we've got, 17,000 miles that we can go that no one's ever investigated. But they didn't think that. I think that the true story is back then they were probably lied to and told they lived on an even smaller ball. And then we discovered, America was discovered, so they enlarged the ball, and who knows what's going to happen in a few years when there's more discovered.
Well, again, I think that the deception in its sort of modern sense is really not that old. I mean, again, we didn't even see the first globes until like 1500. And so prior to that point, I think that it was very much an obscure theory. And of course, science and historians love to make this claim that everybody knew the Earth was a ball since 300 BC with the ancient Greeks. But if you really think about that, I mean, it really doesn't add up. because, you know, if that was the case, then we should have seen globes prior to then. We should have seen attempts at circumnavigation prior to that. And, you know, again, once Columbus did, well, not circumnavigate, but reach the American continent, is right after that you start seeing globes. And so to me, that's a very good indicator that the globe theory was not really widely accepted until, you know, give or take the last 500 years or so.
Yes, and in fact, talking about this issue about, you know, the 6 month difference to see the different sky, of course, the Globians, they say because supposedly the Earth is not, you know, the Earth didn't make a complete 360 degrees, you know, rotation each day. Supposedly you have the sidereal year, then you have the sun year, then you have the moon year. So all this difference, they say this is, you know, the regular history. They say that in the sidereal year, the Earth rotates 365.2421 days. And in the solar day, they have another, you know, difference about minutes. But when you know, accumulate all that minutes, 6 months later, everything match perfectly. So the problem here is some guys, you know, academics, guys like the Professor Siegelman, he explained that the Earth supposedly rotates 360 degrees completely. You know, no 360 point something or 359 point something. No, 360 completely. And others said, no, the Earth rotates with a little different. But the problem here is we're talking all the time about the movement of other things, not the Earth. So first of all, we need to prove that the Earth is rotating. So because if you can prove that, for me at least, it's because anything is moving, but not the Earth. So that is why you measure the sidereal, because you are measuring the movement of the firmament. Then you measure the movement of the sun, then you measure the movement of the moon, and then you measure the movement of the other planets. So all these time delays and time difference for me is because in this you know, clockwork about the creation, anything have their own you know, rhythm, their own movement. So that is why they trying to, you know, trying to match all these kind of things. But first of all, we need to prove definitely that is the Earth moving and rotating.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's not going to be happening anytime soon. And just to put the icing on the cake, guys, of course, many of you have seen this depiction. This is how we're all taught the solar system works with the sun in the center and everything going around, but they never really show any motion of the sun. And that's one of the things that when I became an emissary and delegate for the Nassim Haramein Resonance Project, this is one of the first things that really caught my attention, is when Nassim came out with this a particular graphic saying, well, this would be much more accurate to the way that it would really be. And of course, if the sun is darting through space at 380 to 4,000 miles an hour, I'll ring up the numbers here in a second.
483,000.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, 480.
Okay, so it's darting through space and the Earth is going around it at 67,000 miles an hour. That means that the planets, all of them, are speeding up and slowing down and speeding up and slowing down. That's something we would absolutely detect as angular motion, but we don't.
Yeah. No, in fact, they forgot all that, because for me this is something that, you know, how they operate in the minds of the people. But supposedly from Earth, when you measure of the movement of the planet, you see retrograde motion. But, you know, they just draw an elliptical orbit or perfect round orbit, and you know, in the world forgot about the retrograde motion, because from the Earth you still see retrograde motion of the planet.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Well, and not only that, like John has pointed out several times, you know, even in a matter of 12 hours, right? We're going forward, and at one point in the cycle, we have the Earth pushing up at our feet at 67,000 miles an hour, and then in just a short 12 hours, we transition and go through angular changes, and then we are being pulled by our feet at 67,000 miles an hour. And so we're talking about 134,000 mile an hour change in a matter of 12 hours, which of course you break that down to an hourly thing. And to say that we wouldn't be able to either A, feel it, or B, measure it, or C, detect it in some manner of speaking is patently absurd.
Yeah, it really is. It totally is. And, you know, of course, the argument against this is always, well, first of all, the argument against facing opposite directions in space, like Karen mentioned, is always going to be, oh, the stars are so far away, which makes absolutely no sense. But in terms of this other thing, you know, the argument is always going to be, well, the frame of reference is of the Earth. You are bound to that frame of reference. It's a fixed frame of reference. There is no acceleration, and so therefore you don't feel any of this motion. But to say that spinning around an axis at 1,000 miles an hour while orbiting the sun at 67,000 miles an hour, while the sun orbits the galaxy at a 60-degree angle to the ecliptic plane at 480,000 miles an hour, while the galaxy goes in another conflicting direction along a curved path as well at some millions of miles an hour. I mean, to call that a fixed frame of reference without acceleration is just the most ridiculous thing you could possibly hear. But that's what we're expected to swallow. And you're right, none of this motion has ever been detected, measured, and there would be ample evidence for all of this motion if it did exist, but it simply does not exist.
Yeah, and nor have the stars ever changed in millennia, going back all the way back to the Antikythera machine, which I'm going to pull up an article on that here in a bit. And we have covered the Antikythera machine in the past about its wonderful eclipse forecasting capabilities, and it is done on a flat model. But anyway, so think about this, people, especially the newbies out there. You know, they're telling us that the Earth is going around the sun at 67,000 miles an hour. And then, of course, the sun going around the Milky Way at 483,000 miles an hour. And then when we get up to the Milky Way going around to the Great Attractor, we are at 1,300,000 miles per hour. And this has been going on for millennia, and the skies have never changed. What is their excuse? Oh, the stars are so far away, you'd never know. And relativity, right? Bunch of nonsense.
Yeah, and just a little thing. If you can buy right now a watch with an Antikythera mechanism inside. I don't know if you know that.
No, I didn't. That's amazing.
Yeah. Let me just I'm share the screen.
Oh wow, yeah. Let me click over to you. Just a sec.
Yeah, just for the people know, this is one of the most expensive watch. It's just for elite people, of course, because if you have this watch, you want to know that the Earth is flat. So this watch, you know, if you want to buy this, you must be pay like $300,000, and yeah, because it's with diamonds, you know, gold and things like that. But it's because Rolex. They want to. Yeah, of course, they just want to, you know, these kind of things only the elite people have. And here you can see Gleason type map in the right side of the watch. You can see the constellations in the left side, and the lunar eclipses, and all these is, you know, what is the company? That is the funny thing. The company called Bovet, which means, you know, a dome. You know, that is the company that made this watch. $350,000, and you have a mechanism based entirely on Antikythera, you know, machine. Here you have the Bovet Recital 20 Asterion watch. And if you look the documentary when they present this, the guy, of course, this watch is from Switzerland, you know, Templars, so they have all the knowledge. And in the documentary, the guy start to, drop some words based on the flat Earth, and that secret knowledge is amazing.
That's astounding. Okay. Great find, you're awesome. All right,
I'm stop sharing.
All right, let's kick back over to, and let's pick up on let me make sure I'm still. Oops, let me reshare the Skype screen for you guys. All right. So here we go. All right, so let's continue on with NDT and the rest of his nonsense here.
Add the angles.
Yeah.
Okay, in fact, geometry translates to Earth measurement. So one last thing, which should be obvious,
okay,
if you pay attention and think about it. If you send a ship straight to the horizon,
right,
eventually it begins to disappear until it's no longer visible beyond your horizon.
Right.
And you should ask yourself, what kind of surface would produce that result?
The ocean,
if it's
the ocean has a ramp. It's like a parking lot. The ocean has a ramp.
It's an elevator.
Yeah, it's an elevator. Then you get to a certain point, and they just like going down.
Seafarers knew this.
Right.
And so, however flat they would have imagined the Earth to be, they couldn't have accepted it to be completely flat, because otherwise you would never not see the ship. Okay. Also, if I just tell you, Chuck, walk due east, okay?
Right.
And don't ever stop.
Right.
I just turn around my chair and face this way, and eventually you're going to come back.
Right. And you'll probably be about 150 years old, because I am no Forrest Gump. That is how long it would take me to run the Earth.
For me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I shouldn't even have to play a video. I was going to, but I'm not going to because it's just too stupid. We all know that what Niel said about the boats going over the horizon because of the curvature is BS.
No,
because we have brought it back a million times with telescopes, cameras, whatever. Now, but the next thing that he
did you know though that the Globers don't agree with that? They still will not even admit that.
Of course they
do. In fact, the first thing is any sailor around the plane when they trying to locate based on star, they're gonna assume that the water is flat. They make a triangle, but the base of that triangle is flat. They never make the calculations based on arc, based on that triangulation.
So, absolutely true.
That is the first thing that any sailor knows.
Yeah, and not only that, of course, the Globers don't believe it, and we've said this before. Soundly obviously has his Lake Pontchartrain footage where he would love for you to actually believe that those bridge caissons or whatever they are, the power lines and all that are actually sloping down. But again, as I've said many times, if you were to take, and Soundly will never do this, by the way, never, ever, ever, because he will just bust himself right in the chops if he takes and shoots a side shot of those towers, and they'll see that there is absolutely no curvature at all going away. But again, this is complete deception. That this entire crew does. Slice Barcane, Soundly. I'm about to shove another one up Wolfie's rear end here in a minute. That's another blatant lie, because I really get sick of this stuff, and we're going to address that here in a minute. But as far as his claim of, well, if you head due east and you turn right around, you're going to come back around to the other side. Well, that's just blatantly not true, because first of all, everybody would be using a compass, and as David Weiss demonstrates so very clearly here, that even though it is almost imperceivable that you are actually making a very, very, very small turn, following that compass either west or east, you're still gradually making a very small turn. And yes, you will indeed come right back around to where you left off. However, what you've actually done is you've gone around a complete circle instead of actually going straight forward. So, to say that this couldn't possibly work on a flat Earth is the height of folly, because it most certainly does. In fact, it works much better, because if you think about it, compasses wouldn't work very well on a ball Earth. But that's a whole nother argument. Comments on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think that when you're looking left to right at say your bridge or Lake Pontchartrain, well, you're looking through all that atmospheric lensing, and so you're not going to see any kind of a distortion due to refraction. But when you've now swung that camera to where you're looking down the length of a bridge, then you are going to see remnants of what looks like curvature, which is clearly just refraction. It's light that is, I don't like to say bending, because light doesn't bend, it's just refracting, but it's angled down because you're looking through more and more in atmosphere. So when you start your camera at the bridge next to you, and then you start looking out over a length, it's going to appear to curve down. And that's just the way reality works. And you can go look at anything, and that proves it. And then again, once you realize that point, then you'll understand why surveyors measure a drop when they measure away from them. And just like Neil deGrasse earlier was saying, oh, add this third what do you call it, tunnel or well, add this third well, and then it doesn't work. Well, it'd be the same thing as us saying, well, add a third observer when you're doing your measurements. So somebody in New York measures a drop to Colorado. Well, then add somebody in San Francisco measuring to Colorado. They're both going to measure drop, but we know that Colorado isn't down in a crevice. So, I mean, it's just the same thing. It's the way they use words, the way they employ certain tactics at certain times. It's all just a mind F, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I show a few shows before, but let me just real quick for address this topic. Share one more time the screen. Sorry for the sharing and this stupid. But I found this old documentary, making the Fata Morgana effects on a lab, which is very scientific method. And when you see this, you have superior mirage and inferior mirage. And the problem is, if the object is not present, you're never going to have the mirage or the mirror, because mirage is not like talking, I don't know in English, but here in Spanish is like say mirror. So it's mirror because it's mirror the image. It's not lift up objects behind any hidden curve. If you haven't the object, the actual view of the object, you're never going to reproduce this kind of effects. And this guy make it on the lab, mixing salt water with regular water, and they make all the demonstration about the bending of the light in different mediums and things like that. But the nice thing is he set up this configuration with this paper with the word called Fata Morgana, and they reproduce these three kind of situation in the real life. Of course, they talk about, because it's in Spanish, but they talk about this is the official image, the regular image at the bottom. The third image, it's the double superior mirage, when the image inverted and then inverted again, and that is, you can see that kind of phenomena happen in the real nature, but it's not at the horizon line. That when that kind of effects happen, which is really, really strange, because the winds in the upper atmosphere layers distort that image. It's really a rare event to see doubly, mirage effects. But when that happens, the image, it's totally lift up in the air and never, ever touch the horizon line. So the skyline, the sky city line on the New York or Michigan lake, that kind of things, it's not a superior double mirage, because the city skyline is touching the horizon line, and that never happened. That here you can see it. This is a mountain 20 kilometers away, and you can see the mountain on the horizon line, and the superior mirage, it's on top in the air. They never share that. And I'm start working because you can see here, for example, the typical effects on the ships. This guy start to spin the wheel, and the platform start to elevate. And when you can have this fine detail in the movement, you can reproduce that. But all the time you need the object to be there. If the object is not there, they're never going to rise up an object behind the curve. That was never reproduced in the lab and in the real life. The amount of refraction to lift up an object is not a real thing.
Yeah.
In fact, yeah.
I was just saying, it's beautiful what you're saying, because just last week I was talking to that Steve McRae, who says that you can't, he's talking about boats, and he says you can't bring these items back from behind the curve because the photons don't reach the eye. So when a boat goes over the curve, it's impossible for you to zoom in and bring that boat back again because the photons are blocked. Well, Steve, explain Chicago from Michigan. Explain Cannegal from 160 miles, because your excuse is refraction. And you're saying that it's lifting these items up and displaying them, which means that it's allowing the photons to get over the curve of the Earth. But that doesn't make any sense. Just like Eero just said, the mountain is there. That's why you're able to see it. Nothing is being lifted. Just, you know, yeah, go ahead.
No, in fact, I am start to reproduce that the phenomena in computer, because I'm talking about the Canigó mountain, you know. I think Eugene talk about that, and in Taboo Conspiracy also talk about the phenomena when the sun goes behind this mountain in French, and, you know, you can see the mountain 300 kilometers away. And I'm start to programming a new, you know, Fata Morgana thing. And even I can just for I'm going to render this quickly, but here you can see the mountain in a geometrical way. And when you apply, I can apply even a Fata Morgana for, let me just, I do this very quickly. I don't have finish, but you can see the mountain, which is here. You're gonna see up here and inverted, because I can reproduce that superior mirage. And if I put this mountain behind the surface of the water, and this is the setup. This is 400 kilometers square. This is Marsella, French, and this is the Canigó in Spain. And if I put this mountain and I put it down there, never it's gonna rise up. You know, there is no possibility in the real nature.
Right. Wow. Excellent.
Hey, could I do a real quick screen share that's sort of expanding on a similar point?
Sure.
And I've covered this before, but I really wanted to hammer the point home about refraction, because this is such a big one. You know, for the longest time, for years, we all struggled against the Metabunk calculator, which seemingly everybody went to. Instead of doing their math themselves, they would go to the Metabunk calculator as sort of a shortcut to figure out expected curvature on a spherical Earth. And of course, you know, we've talked about it before, but they added this thing called standard refraction, which is, you know, that's silly. I mean, refraction is a variable. But let me do a screen share really quickly, if I can. And or do you have to present me?
No, you are being presented, so go ahead and do your screen share. And yes,
sweet.
John,
there we go.
You're absolutely right. There is no flippin' such thing as standard refraction. That is just ridiculous that anybody even buys into that. So I won't go into that again, though.
All right, let's see here. I'm trying to remember how to screen share.
The plus button down at the bottom, and then share screens.
There we go. Yeah, all right. And here we go. Start. So if you guys let me know that I'm sharing. Again, this is... Yep, this was taken July 16th, 2016. It's as far as I know, it's still the current long-distance landscape photograph. This is Pic de Fenestreas from Pic de Acrins, 273 miles away. Now, then that's this peak right here. And I've got all of the elevation of the observer, the distances to the horizon, expectedly if the Earth was a sphere. And so just to break this down a little bit, let me see if I can play through this and get where I need it. There we go, right there. So at this point here, the observer's up, I think, 1.5 miles. Their horizon should be at 117 miles. And at that point, their apparent horizon on a spherical Earth, their line of sight should begin to diverge from the curve at 8 inches per mile squared, meaning this 273-mile distant peak should be over 0.5 mile below the horizon line. So now if you plug these exact numbers into the Metabunk calculator, what you'll find is that their magical standard refraction will essentially nullify all of this vertical descent due to curvature. But what they're claiming is that this mountain distant upon a curve is raised up in elevation about 3 miles or so, because, you know, the mountain's 2.5 miles tall. The hidden distance should be a little over 0.5 mile, and we can see the thing from base to peak. So the base would have to be up here somewhere. That's like 3 miles. Now, where they really ran into trouble is, again, as we've mentioned several times, is that they've got their whole refraction thing backwards. And instead of causing this mountain to raise up into the air, it should cause it to appear to drop lower and lower. And this is, of course, exactly why we see the phenomenon of distant ships, going over the horizon and appearing to go over a curve. It has everything to do with refraction. Now, here's another point.
How do they explain the refraction idea? I don't even get where is the light being sent and then bent down due to a heavier medium? Where is this? How can that take place that causes that to rise up?
Right, it doesn't make any sense. What they're saying is that the light reflected off of this mountain is somehow bending up this way to cause the illusion that it's way up here. Making the spherical Earth somehow appear to be a plane in all circumstances.
No, it's like that drawing is perfect. If you picture that being a flat Earth, that the reason you see the mountain dropping down at all is because you're looking through more and more and more atmosphere, which is going to cause the mountain to look lower. And that's why things do look lower in the distance, but they certainly are not exactly as they would be on a sphere. They're exactly as they would be on a flat Earth with refraction.
Exactly. In fact, the thing to questioning is show me a real experiment when some kind of hidden object rise up. Just show me that.
Right. And so
show me that.
Here's the other big part of this is, what we actually see upon a plane is perspective. So this is sort of a side view of what this observer would see, assuming that all of these objects are the same height. He's going to see them appear to get smaller and smaller with distance. Now, if we also lived on a ball, once you get to his horizon distance, say he's 6 foot tall, about 3 miles away, you get to his horizon distance, then those objects are not only going to appear smaller due to perspective, but they're also going to drop along that curve as well. So you'd have a double effect. You'd have what we actually see, which is perspective on a plane, plus you would also have this vertical descent due to the object getting distant along a curve. And for them to claim that that is somehow going to cause this mountain that's 273 miles away to magically rise up in the air 3 miles, it's first of all, it's backwards. They've got refraction wrong. Refraction is going to cause this light to bend down towards the higher density gradient. It's just simple. That's how refraction works. And if there's temperature changes in between your eye and that reflecting object, the mountain, then you can have varying degrees of refraction. But at the end of the day, for them to claim that refraction always works in favor of the globe, no matter what, and regardless of how distant an object is, it's always going to appear to be on a planar Earth because of refraction, which is like, I mean, that is so just way out in left field. I cannot believe that is a scientific stance on this sort of portion of the debate.
Yeah, you described it perfectly, John, where you showed that picture of the guy standing. This picture here is perfect because that's what Robotham was saying. When you point that telescope down and it follows the top of every one of those poles to infinity, that means that the Earth is flat. If it was curved, then that telescope following those lines would deviate away from those lines. The line would start to drop away, and not even at an equal pace. It would be exponential. But we don't see that.
Yep, it absolutely would. And what's so funny is it appears that the specific conditions on Earth, refraction, even on a macroscopic level, like refraction of the inbound celestial lights, as well as on the micro level, so like reflected light coming off of a ship that's traveling over the horizon, it's almost as if some higher power wanted to trick us into, like, really give us good, at least elementary observational evidence that the Earth has curvature. But the simple fact is in the case of the distant ships, that they're not going over the curve. It's the light that is curving or refracting, apparently. And in terms of the macro level, where you've got, for example, stars that appear to be directly next to the horizon. Say you're at a real clear night and you're, say, in the desert or out at sea, there's going to be stars that appear to be right near the horizon. And, of course, we know that in the flat Earth reality, the star isn't anywhere near the horizon. but it's perspective, it's distant from you, so perspective will cause it to drop, but then refraction also causes it to drop as well. And so it is that macroscopic curving or refraction of inbound celestial lights that also provides this sort of illusion of a celestial sphere, which does sort of lend circumstantial evidence or lend some credence to the spherical Earth theory. But, you know, physical experiment and basic geometry prove time and time and time again that there's no sort of curvature. And I'm just thinking if there's one more point. Oh, just wanted to cover this again. I know I've mentioned this before, but in terms of the counter rotation of the southern stars, which is another one that is easily explainable by refraction and different ways that light passes through different media. You know, you can see in this example where just simply looking through a glass of water will cause images to invert and change direction of travel. And so it's demonstrable that simply, you know, different types of media that light travels through will cause light to do all sorts of peculiar things that don't necessarily make the Earth a sphere. Because
look at the item. Go back to that pouring of the water,
Sure.
and you'll actually see that the arrow itself drops. Because again, you're looking through more and more atmosphere. Call it atmosphere. Call it whatever you want, which causes that arrow to drop. And people might say, well, things in the distance don't switch directions, Jaron. Well, the reason for that is because this glass is curved. If you put that water into a square glass, the arrow will not switch directions. So the direction switch is because of the curved glass, and the lowering is because of the added atmosphere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that pretty much covered everything I wanted to mention on that, but it goes right hand in hand with what Eero and you guys were talking about. And this is, you know, that one piece of evidence is just so compelling. I think it's something that everybody should promote because it's really just phenomenal. So let me stop at a sharing then.
Okay, and I'm going to go back over to mine, and let's go ahead and wrap this up because we have a couple other things that we need to cover. So I'm going to wrap up the NDT thing. And we still have some stuff from Eero, and then I've got some more stuff on vacuum, and then we want to, you know, take our shot at Wolfie 6020.
Oh, and space travel.
And space travel, yes. All right, so let's continue on with NDT here. Here we go.
Yeah. We're having so much fun with it.
The fact that there's a rise of flat earthers is evidence of two things.
Okay.
One, we live in a country that protects free speech.
Bullshit. Okay, anyway, continue on.
That's actually kind of awesome.
And two, we live in a country with a failed educational system.
Ooh.
Boy, that's absolutely true, but listen to this. You're going to love what he says next.
Ooh, that one hurt.
Our system needs to train you not only what to know, but how to think about information and knowledge and evidence. No.
What was that?
But how to think about information and...
Ooh, that one hurt.
Our system needs to train you not only what to know, but how to think about information and knowledge and...
Which is exactly what I was saying, right? It's like this is the indoctrination process where you think it's our way or the highway. Anybody that thinks outside of the box doesn't move on. And this is why everybody's thinking the same.
It's not a failed example of the education system because the education system clearly did what science wanted them to do, which was force this stuff down our throats. The Earth is round. Here's all these other planets. Here's these galaxies. You're very small and tiny. We all believed that. So the education system did its job other than the fact that they forgot to provide evidence, which is science's fault. Science should have been the one to say, if you're going to teach these things, show them all this evidence, show them all these examples. They didn't do it. They didn't do a good job. You know, that's their bad.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so let's move on.
Well, I was just going to say it goes all the way back to philosophical preferences that were guiding quote-unquote scientific progress, you know, way back in the day when you had essentially royalty and religious powers and monies that were funding scientific research and development. And so we saw things like the Copernican principle and Newton's Principia and all of this heavy leaning towards sort of like an infinite space, insignificant Earth theory, because frankly, a lot of these people found the idea of a central, unique position of the Earth frightening, because it inherently implies accountability for our actions on what, on this world. I think that's my opinion, but
I think it's no doubt, John. I think what you're saying is the actual underlying, basis of this all is all because people pushed their mindset, their worldview, and called it science. And we can see that today. People like Red's Rhetoric or Soundly, or these people that have one little observation that they think points to a circular Earth or a sphere Earth, and they get together and they laugh and hee-haw about how dumb flat earthers are and how smart they are. Well, what they're doing is they're not doing science anymore. They're pushing their worldview and trying to call it science. Well, that's what science is. Science is the worldview of the guys who certainly didn't like anything that the church was bringing, didn't like anything like that, so they went off on their own, and any observation that they made, they pushed it in that direction. Even when you've got physicists today that will tell you flat out that the Earth could be central, and you wouldn't be able to tell with observations. There's no difference. The only difference is they went in a different direction. So they developed this whole science all based on the fact that everywhere we look is all the same, and the galaxy's moving away from us doesn't mean we're in the center, but it means we're on a balloon. Well, the reason they go with the whole balloon theory is because it's the only thing that works with that direction. If you're going to say everything looks the same in all directions and all galaxies are moving away from us, then you have to say we're on a balloon expanding, or else nothing makes any sense. So the universe has to be expanding. Everything that they've told us is because of their worldview. Nothing because of experimentation. Well, not nothing because of experiments. When they do an experiment and they're looking for a result, they're going to go with the one that fits their narrative. And that's how they've built in their entire science. But now we need to look at it and say, what have we been given? We've been given dark matter. 95% of the universe has never been observed. We don't know, everything is just a disaster and a mess. And it's because of the worldview.
Well, and you also have this very self-reinforcing ignorance, a good case in point, and this is just signature and abound with Globe Earth, but the self-reinforcing ignorance where, say, okay, so Newton noticed that what goes up must come down. Okay, so we're not debating that. That's a natural observation of physics on the Earth. And of course, gravity was developed as a theory to explain this observation. But what Team Globe does is they'll take the theory of gravity and say that it is proven by that original observation of what goes up must come down. And if you really stop to think about this, it's not scientific at all, yet people will point to the fact that, like Neil deGrasse Tyson himself did in the famous B.O.B. disc, he drops a microphone on the ground, says that proves gravity, when in fact that is merely a demonstration of what goes up must come down. And again, gravity is just a theory to explain that phenomenon, if and only if you assume that the Earth is a spinning ball, which there's no evidence for that either. So, this is just telltale signature globism. It's really, really ironic and humorous once you get to a certain point with all of this research.
Well, they tell us all that science is trying to prove their model wrong, right? You always try and prove your beliefs wrong. You always try and well, where is science trying to prove the ball Earth wrong? That's the absolute. They would never do that. It's against every rule. So, I mean, it's not what science should be. If it is about trying to prove it wrong, none of these guys are out there, Wolfie, these other guys, are not trying to prove their model wrong. They're trying to prove it correct. Every day they're trying to prove it correct. It's not impressive. It's already the going belief. So what you should be trying to do is prove it wrong, and then you'll clearly see that it doesn't stand up to scrutiny.
Yeah, and they're not objective about it at all. I mean, they'll take evidence that is either circumstantial or hypothetical and use that as supposed proofs of their theory, but that's about all they've got. Another example of this sort of thing would be hot atomic fusion causing the stars, but I'm sorry, hot atomic fusion is theoretical. It's never been demonstrated, so how can you use that as, proof of anything? I mean, it just goes on and on and on with these guys.
And if you're trying to discover whether or not your wife is cheating on you and the only person you go to is your wife, well, I hate to tell you, you're never going to prove that wrong. You're going to, you have to go to other sources and actually look from other directions. These guys think that whenever there's a question about science, they go to Wikipedia. They go to the textbook and they say, no, here it clearly shows where, well, yeah, if we're telling you science is lying to you and you're going to the science textbooks for your answers, well, you're going to always believe in science.
Yep.
All right. Okay, let's finish this out and see what other nonsense they have. Here we go.
And evidence. If we don't have that kind of training, you'd run around believe anything.
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 And if you're interested in learning more about the Earth, the Sun, and how the fact that we're hurling through space at what is it, 17,000 miles per hour? Is that what we're going?
Did you just pull that number out of your?
I did. You know where I pulled it from. So you should consider all of this and consider checking out Brilliant, whether you are an adamant defender of the Earth's curves, or a professional scientist or a lifelong learner. Brilliant helps you master concepts of math, science, and engineering through solving fun, challenging problems. And you can sign up for free to get access to weekly challenges. And as a bonus to Star Talk viewers, anyone up to the 19th prime number.
Blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, needless to say, virtually every single thing these two said was dead wrong. We proved it at every point. And this is an organization that is peddling science education. Lord help us.
Yeah, indeed. And don't you love how they just completely disregard any facts, any arguments? It's more of a peer pressure piece. I mean, this is very much propaganda. But instead of actually showing curvature, showing any sort of data that proves this motion that they laugh about, that's so funny. They're sitting there chuckling that, 17,000 miles an hour, which I don't know where he got that number either, but as if this is something that we all know. And, we're hauling ass around multiple inverse square curves at varying, conflicting directions constantly. But, I mean, the joke is definitely on them, but it's kind of sad because they don't see it. As plain as day as it may be.
Absolutely. All right, so before we go on to the next item, Iru contacted me last night and has some very interesting news about AMSAT. And Iru, you want to kind of take it away and tell them what you're up to with AMSAT?
Yes, let me just, if you want to show a few things, I'm gonna to arrange the topic. I believe, we are going to talk about this the last 5 minutes of the show, so
okay, that's fine.
I'm not, let me just put the thing together, so continue and I tell you when I'm done.
I'll do that, and let me just go ahead and then let's go through Wolfie's video then. This will probably take 10-15 minutes or something like that, and hopefully you'll be ready for that. So let's take our shot at Wolfie here. Many of you.
Oh joy!
Oh joy! Okay, so going back once again to the whole vacuum issue, and of course I told you last week I wasn't going to let this go, and I have continued to endeavor down this road, and I think that I have some very interesting factoids that I've come up with. Not the least of which is something that Chris Monk-Seeley sent me. Just today, it was this PDF, 136 pages, I haven't gone through it yet, about ultra-high vacuum science. But anyway, what I wanted to say, first of all, is, of course, when I made that statement about it was my opinion that Elon Musk's car would have blown up the tires going up on that, of course everybody had to jump on it and, pick the low-hanging fruit on this one. And so what Wolfie does is he goes out and he goes to an air station and basically says, okay, well, what I'm going to do is my tires are supposedly at 35 PSI and I'm going to overinflate them to double that and prove to you unequivocally that, it's just nonsense and it doesn't work. Well, first of all, I have to say that Wolfie lied about double overinflating it. He only went to about 15 pounds over, but that's neither here nor there. But let's listen to a couple of things that Wolfie says, and then I will go back and show you where Wolfie went wrong. So let's see here.
In space, the pressure differential is increasing by 14.7 pounds per square inch. So we can test that very easily just by taking our normal car tire and increasing the pressure by 14.7 psi. Let's round that up to 15 psi to go even higher. And as you will see in the following demonstration, I do that with my own car. I increase the psi from 32 psi up to 47, so that's a 15 psi increase. It's simulating the pressure differential that you would experience if the tires were put into space. And as you will see very clearly, there's no explosion. So the flat Earth claim that the tires on the Tesla would explode if it was put into space in a vacuum is completely incorrect.
Okay, so Wolfie's going to take the pressure and inflate it to 15 pounds over. And I apologize, I thought he was said double that, but I retract that and say, okay, so he did say 14.7 pounds over. That's great. And then he does it, and he blows up his tire here, and let's watch him do this.
So I'll just I'll increase that to...
So he's going to kick it up now and get it all over inflated. And then after he does that, he makes, of course, the statement that he has completely debunked the idea of a set of tires going to space that would experience that 14.7 psi pressure differential would not.
So we're inflating the tire to 15 psi higher than the normal operating pressure.
So he has increased the pressure. And let's see.
So there it is at 47 psi. There was no explosion. The tire is perfectly fine. Exploding tires in space, fully debunked.
Okay. So Wolfie has debunked me, fully debunked, because obviously the conditions are just the same down here as they are in space. Everybody knows that, right? The pressure differential couldn't, has to be absolutely a linear scale or whatever, and there's no difference between 14 pounds of pressure and 0 pounds versus 14 pounds and pressure of 28 pounds. And of course, what Wolfie does is he obfuscates many, many things. One of the things that he totally failed to, include in the conditions of this, of space, is of course the temperature. All right. Now,
exactly.
Here's one thing that we have got to consider. Well, I started looking at tires, and it's like, gee, tires are pretty crazy, and they are pretty tough, and I will admit that. Steel belted. I don't know what their tensile strength is or anything like that. But what I did find out is that, in order to recycle tires, what a lot of these companies do is they freeze them, all right? And what they do is they freeze them with liquid nitrogen right here, and they cool the rubber down to minus 100 degrees Celsius. Okay, guys. So, for those of you in the United States, the temperature of minus 100 C equates to minus 148 degrees Fahrenheit. So what happens when they do this? Well, when they cool the rubber to this temperature, which really isn't very cold at all, minus 150 Fahrenheit, it basically makes it so rigid that they are able to shatter it into particles no more than 180 microns in size. Well, isn't that interesting? So one has to then ask themselves, you got it, what's the temperature of outer space? Okay. Well, we come to find out that space can get as cold as minus 455 degrees Fahrenheit, which is just a mere 300 degrees colder even than what they freeze tires at to shatter them into little bitty micron-sized pieces, right? So, of course, Wolfie would never include that in his debunk, right? Because obviously, even if it's just outside of Earth and it's only maybe minus 250 degrees Fahrenheit, it's still way colder than what that liquid nitrogen would be getting it to be able to do this. So can I still make the statement that the car tire would shatter? Well, I got news for you, Wolfie. It would shatter even if we didn't add any additional air, because the tire would be so unbelievably dense and frozen that the expansion of the air inside of it all, even a little bit, would shatter that thing into a billion little pieces, right? Not to mention, the overinflating, or, the fact that space is another 300 degrees colder even yet than what they recycle tires at here on Earth. So, sorry, Wolfie, you blew it again. And of course, as always, you're only looking at the side of the argument that supports your nonsense. because, like I said, you wouldn't even have to have but a few pounds difference, and that's all it would take to absolutely annihilate that tire, and it would explode because it would be so unbelievably frozen and rigid. Okay, now.
Yeah, facts schmacks.
Yeah, facts schmacks. Wham. All right. So, like I said, Wolfie is just a disinformationalist. He's just somebody he's a faceless potato. And, you know, he just spouts nonsense most of the time. And almost every one of his claims, his counterclaims, is debunked. And yet you go to his videos, and, of course, he's got all his fan club as well saying, oh, gee, boom, like soundly, you know, saying that they've really put us in our place. Well, sorry, Wolfie, I just put you in your place. You're dead wrong, and I've used your own mainstream physics to do it.